I want to take the liberty of sharing some of the thoughts which came to my mind from this presentation. Since I am not from your industry, that is the fit out industry, I could only. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I could only think of things which don't go into technicalities of your job. What I realized that one of the things that the JLL team has shared with all of us is what are the kind of best practices which need to be followed primarily as a project management team. They do follow, and many suggestions came from them of what are the kind of best practices that the contracting team needs to follow. Am I right?
Yes.
Now, the thought that came to my mind was many of the things that they talked about, probably the normal thought process would be that many of those things can be afforded only if the project is so large that a corporate like JLL is a PMC and the end customer, your main customer is also multinational, or it's a real large project. I do realize, because ultimately everything, many of those things to bring in to ensure, for example, certain kinds of audit, certain kind of I think Aziz suggested that you should have a different, or Sabya suggested you should have a separate billing person. Somehow I got an impression that this is not a practice which is being followed very often. Now, obviously, it requires expenses. So, what I realized that there are two implications of this. One, in such project, if you do get in, which is large, where you are interacting with PMCs like, the professional large PMCs like JLL, you have no option but to provide those things. But the second part, which is very important, is that this best practice is what probably will start making a difference between who will survive and grow and who will not. The question is, how do we invest so much money into these things? I have a small suggestion on this. It is not only a question of money, it is also a lot to do with our attitude. There are two important areas which, from this presentation, I thought we need to focus as far as the attitude is concerned. One, adoption of technology. Adoption of technology, because some of those easily available apps may not be costing too much. But an attitude has to be there to somehow be in lookout for those kind of technological tools, and an attitude of incorporating that in my operational processes. Second thing is, and that is the most critical thing, not only in your business, but in every business today, which is the people, human resources part. Unfortunately, even today, the kind of emphasis that must come on the human resource part is missing in most businesses. Unfortunately, even today, it may be a bit different in your business, which is highly dependent on people at site. But still, very often, the focus on bringing in people is more on the cost that you are going to incur on them than the value that they can add directly in your business. Very often, people are seen as tools to implement things decided by the leaders in the company. Am I right or are you totally different? Very often it is assumed in most businesses, and to a certain extent, at least in your business also, that the more senior you are, the more intelligent you are, the more knowledgeable you are in the sense of what needs to be done, and the more junior the person is, the more he can be best used for is to do what he is being told. But in a competitive atmosphere where you want not only adoption of technology but you also want adoption of best practices, both these things cannot be implemented unless the junior most person is motivated to adopt the technology and the best practices and is competent to adopt the practices and the technology. What I am simply trying to say is that your carpenter on site, you cannot afford a situation when there is a project involving JLL and multinational that somehow other your supervisors are ensuring that he is behaving properly the way the customer wants, he is wearing everything. And the moment it's some other client, you save resources by allowing him to do whatever he wants to do. Because the customer is not bothered about it, because the project manager is not bothered about it. And that is where you are committing a mistake. Because your system should not depend on the supervisor to insist on it. Your system should be that the labor himself should be motivated to follow what as an organization philosophy you will decide. So it all comes down to what kind of organization philosophy you want to build. Because in the long run, you will make money and grow only when you actually start doing more and more projects of the type that the JLLs and multinationals make you do. Because if that is what you become, then you attract more and more those businesses for yourself. So my simple reading of the whole situation is the people must be the responsibility, because many of the organizations are not too large. A JLL can afford to get the best HR head in the country probably, with the best HR team. But most of the small organizations cannot afford a good HR person, because HR has a lot to do with people's connectivity, understanding the minds, motivating the minds. You can have an HR person in your organization whose only job is to mark attendance and take care of leaves, whom, because you have heard of a performance appraisal, so without really understanding how the whole thing actually should work, he manages to do those formalities and rituals of performance appraisals. My suggestion is, this is something HR, it should be the direct ownership and responsibility of the head of the business. A small organization cannot afford to focus, to have the head of the business focusing on how to increase my business and profitability, and HR as a department is handed over to, many times we don't have an HR person, or if we have an HR person, we must remember HR's complexity is so high that unless and until the organization is really big, you can never afford to get an HR person who actually understands what is HR. So it all comes down to, if you can afford to motivate and train your people so that they are competent, which of course it's not only training, starts from the recruitment, and that is where again the focus comes in what is it that you are looking for when you are recruiting somebody. The whole thing can work out only when your people have a sense of ownership. And you must remember a simple sentence: your people will never have a sense of ownership unless you make them feel they are the owners of your business. So, in short, I am only trying to say, whatever business you are into, unless in competitive world, all this becomes important for competition. When there was no competition, head of the organization, the most intelligent fellow, knew what to do. He only had to employ people who will do what he says. Competitive world destroys that paradigm, destroys that myth. It is not possible. Competitive world forces that when you go into a store, the store girl or the security man at the gate welcomes you with a smile. That is what the competitive world forces you. So if you want to really grow, if you want to really get good money, as times come, my suggestion is, strong suggestion is, focus on this issue besides whatever else you are doing in the business. Thanks a lot.
Very true.
The speakers, please come forward. Mr. Aziz. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Parag.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for traveling all the way from Pune. Shopping? Yeah. Thank you. Can you all join so we can have a group photo, please?
And my only request is, before we all go for lunch, is that we have started this knowledge series, as I said, very honestly, only to add value to your business. We would be most happy and thankful and grateful to you if you share with us anytime your suggestions or pain areas where we can try to do something for our next series. So we'll be really thankful if you could suggest things to us so that we can work out how to help you in that. Thanks a lot. Please.
Thank you.